Just quick introductions. We have from UNLV, we have Frank Alaimo, who is a senior AV system specialist. We have Bob Smith, who's director of classroom innovation at Stanford. We have Jason Eitelbach, who's an AV system design engineer at University of Notre Dame. And we have Joe Way, who's director of learning environments at University of Southern California. So I've asked Joe to sort of coordinate the conversation for us today. And guys, I'm really looking forward to this. So Joe, I'll hand it over to you, and you guys do what you talk about the best.
All right. Hey, thank you very much. And we have Jeffrey on too here.
Oh, I missed Jeff. I'm sorry.
There we go. Hey, that's why I'm moderating. See, you're the voice in the darkness, and I'm here bringing light to the panel. So there we go.
Thank you, Joe.
Of course. Hey, no, thank you very much for the invite. When you see this list of panelists, you're going, wait, I got to moderate what? Because we've just got 4 rock stars here with us today. So we're going to jump right in. Yeah, we are talking about the critical elements for designing future-ready hybrid classrooms. There's quite the mouthful. So in our prep, I ended up asking, what are we doing? Who's actually taking their bill of materials, shredding it up, and doing something new? And of course, we'll start right away going right to Frank, because controversy is always the best way to start a panel. Frank, talk about that.
Yeah, when have you ever known me to keep my mouth shut, right? Frankly, I'm hanging on to my current bill of materials. I'm of the naysayers that I think that this is a necessary need for right now, but I have the funny suspicion that moving forward after a semester, maybe a semester or 2 of the current situation, we may be heading back or have some sort of similarity of both instances for research classes and some classes that absolutely need to be on campus. I think that throwing out our bill of materials of our rooms that we know work as a standard right now, I think that'd be just silly. I think we need to keep with that and keep evolving that. But I think we also need to focus on the problem we have in hand right now, and we need to get our classrooms ready for the situation that we're coming up into very shortly.
Yep. Jeff?
If you had asked me that question 2 years ago, I would have been on board saying, yep, I'm throwing it all away. But we had recently updated our standard. And so that standard actually is very flexible and does allow us to do a number of different things. And so I agree with Frank. It just so happens that we're on a good standard now that gives us some latitude, and we need to keep evolving that.
Which is an interesting question. So I'm going to stick with you then on this. So I know for us at USC, we had to really upgrade all of our spaces. We had a lot of legacy spaces. We were already in the process of doing an enterprise upgrade this summer, and then COVID happens. And I'm going to say we got lucky because we'd already planned for it. Had we not been planning, I don't know what we would have done. So was the, being able to capture the audio, video, was that already your standard? Were you already thinking, hey, maybe not COVID, but we need to account for these types of things already? And if so, or if not, what change did you recognize now that we're in the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, so we were planning to do that with our new standard. So, we didn't have, and I can tell you even today, we don't have, classroom cameras everywhere yet. But we are regularly doing about 20% of our rooms every year to keep things on a refresh cycle. So as we go ahead, we are adding these cameras into some of our rooms so that, faculty have that option to use it for lecture capture if they're more comfortable. Frankly, they're getting pretty comfortable with Zoom because they had to. And so a lot of them are using that. But in terms of that production value, some may want to be on campus and use those rooms. And then as we get back to full time, which for us is sort of slated out there in October sometime, barring other changes. I agree with Frank. I think people will want it to be business as usual. I just kind of look at this as a great opportunity to push some people further down the road to using these technologies we've all been talking about for years. So that's sort of the silver lining of the tragedy going on right now.
Absolutely.
I think this is the pinnacle I told you so moment that all of us as technology folks at universities have been trying to make noise to the higher ups, and we're saying, let's progress, move along. And there always hasn't been funding for it. There's always been something else comes up. And then you get those one-offs that work great, but then they get forgotten about if someone doesn't use them all the time. And then here we are at this scenario where, Joe, for instance, you're already renovating your rooms, you're already making that step. And I wish, you know, a lot of other schools luck in doing that, but it's not always, you know, the dollars aren't always there, the time isn't there. And frankly, it has to be driven by the need of the faculty. If the faculty don't want to use that space, they're not going to go to their dean and request to build that space. They want tradition, and you know, we're kind of in a tough spot because we can only do what we're told to do and what we're funded for.
Yep, 100%. I love that. And so I want to go now to Bob here there at Stanford. Now, you guys have always been pretty video heavy, if I'm not mistaken. So was there a change kind of with you all, or at least you had some, or what changes are you making to kind of design for the future?
We've been in classroom video for a lot of years, back in the late 60s, actually. But that's not the same thing as being video heavy. That's been an organization called the Stanford Center for Professional Development, which has been an operation of the School of Engineering for a lot of years. And they use that as a means of providing distance education for young professionals working for companies around the valley and that sort of thing. Aside from that, we've actually been way behind the curve on video, largely because we're kind of looking at it saying, okay, if the coin of the realm, if the gold standard that you're trying to get at is to be face to face in the same space with the full sensorium going on for you, then what is the role of this 2D thing in the screen that we're looking at here, in, you know, relative to people in live space? And add to that, there's some research evidence that makes it very clear that students love recorded classes. Of course they do. It makes their life convenient. But there's not a lot of evidence that it makes their learning any better. It's really kind of wishy-washy, not really there one way or the other. It doesn't make it necessarily worse, but it doesn't make it better. And so there's been a hesitance to adopt the notion of having lots of video as sort of the backbone of operations here. Now, of course, we've got a different situation in that it may be that the gold standard is to get everyone in the room around the table and talk it out, but that's not an option. And so Zoom was what they all got thrown into in spring quarter, and that seems to have been, you know, to varying degrees successful. And it's going to be, to a large degree, what's going on in the fall as well, because Santa Clara County has not yet given us any guidelines as to when groups can meet. And so right now, regardless of what size classroom you've got, we can have 10 people in that room. One of them is instructors, that's 9 students. At the same time, we need to maintain social distancing, which goes from a 6-foot bubble to a 38 square foot bubble to a 50 square foot bubble, depending on who you're talking to and how long the class is. And so we're in a very strange space. I think there are a few classes that absolutely must be taught, you know, mano a mano, as it were, but I think there's going to be as much a demand for really nice places to host a Zoom conference from, where faculty have the ability to do annotation live, where they have the ability to, you know, engage with whatever media they want to live. And that's something we're talking about putting into the smaller classrooms that wouldn't for a moment support social distancing for more than 1 or 2 people. Basically set them up as small studios over campus for the use by the rest of the faculty.
Yep. No, that's a great points there, because, you know, I especially like the annotation side, because the earlier panel I was on, we talked about ways to start to be more effective through the online methods, right? It's not just lecturing to a camera. So we're having to look into creative ways to make the education more engaging, whether it be the discussion groups, things like that, but maybe tangible things. We're looking at the Wolf Vision visualizers. How can we get this information for those faculty who want to be able to write something down and be able to share that content. So those are great points. And Jason, so I'm going to transition to you based off something else that Bob said about social distancing. You know, as part of the Higher Education Technology Managers Alliance at our thing last week, we ended up giving Notre Dame and all a little a head nod and award for you guys came up with this little social distancing hexagon model to figure out where to put students. So I know the whole idea here is being future ready. So talk a little bit how, one, you're dealing with the social distancing now with people on camp, you know, to get people back on campus. But now, what is the impact of that for moving forward? Are you making changes to what you're doing physically in the classroom to accommodate that? Is it just spacing? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I think, you know, one of the things that we're doing here at Notre Dame is it is a very like vertically integrated operation. So, you know, Frank, you had talked a little bit about, you know, where are these requests coming from? So a lot of what we're doing design-wise is driven from faculty committees through our teaching and learning and technologies group. One of the interesting things about the way we're organized is we're organized under ND Studios. So we have a lot of production knowledge base and also, you know, those the sort of ever elusive educational technologists that we're all kind of it's all part of one whole process. So as far as how we're doing the layouts of the classrooms, I think initially it is being done kind of very formulaic, and it is very much just about spacing people out in the physical space. But what the technology is there for in those rooms in our hybrid designs is to augment that, to create more of a kind of full duplex communication from remote and local participants. So the idea isn't so much is really trying to do as best we can to build a real synchronous atmosphere by augmenting it with these, you know, high fidelity cameras and microphones to kind of get people into the classroom virtually. So it's not the sort of necessarily like a standard proscenium view, although a lot of our professors like to teach with chalkboards and kind of very conventional setups. We can accommodate that, but then really try to get a more higher fidelity experience. So from a design standpoint, we're not going through and doing much, I think, on the physical side. It's really more about kind of recalibrating where people can sit and kind of how people are distributed throughout the space, but then really focusing in on the technology with that in mind, so that, you know, we can have folks in the space however they're going to be related to that and driven by those committees, and then we build the technology kind of around that use case.
That is fantastic. I love the full duplex.
Yeah.
Is that your version of high flex? Is that where we're going?
Well, no, we're adopting the high flex branding as well. But I think, you know, in our proof of concepts that we've just run through in the last couple of weeks, what we were really, from my standpoint of kind of a silent observer on the Zoom calls, is pretty quickly people stopped talking about the technology, and then we had a big meeting virtually in a classroom of all the different, you know, we had faculty members, registrar, TLT people, ND learning, all these folks in the space. And they just start talking about, well, we think we need to do this, and we need to approach it this way, and we need to make sure we have this square footage. And I was pretty happy in those proof of concepts because we had that technology in there and people stopped talking about the technology and it just kind of faded into the background.
No, that's great. That's great. So I'm going to do one that I'm going to throw out to the group here. If we want to talk about a classroom experience traditionally, we would say that you need a display of some sort or projector. You need speakers of some sort. You need an input device of some sort, you know, and maybe a control system. That's at least a general setup. Is there anything else that we're now saying to be future ready we have to accommodate for? Or is that that's our classroom?
You know, I think for us, the thing is about, you know, typically our classrooms are custom solutions, right? So we control how things are integrated, how things are automated, what the control, you know, we pick and select the products based on that. But when we move onto these cloud sourced platforms, we have to then design around a kind of a totally different set of automation. So I think for us, it isn't about throwing out, you know, the past, but it's about figuring out how where we slot into that narrow band. So it's a lot of designing onto not platforms, but sort of common carriers that we don't normally do, like USB, UVC, and some of these other, you know, Zoom whitelisted devices and things like that.
Yep. How about you guys, Frank?
Yeah, I'm concerned with everyone right now is telling us about the high touch areas that need to be sanitized, right? So I don't think the folks saying what needs to be sanitized really understand how many high touch items there are just from the door to the lectern, let alone all the devices at the lectern. If we're going to be sanitizing every piece of equipment, you're going to have to shut that room down. It's basically room, shut it down, class, shut it down, so on and so forth, because it's a lot of sanitization, right? So if we want to get rid of that, fine. You're going to get rid of touch panels, do everything by voice. Okay, so what? The computer, the mouse and keyboard that's there. Are we going to issue a wireless mouse and keyboard to every instructor so they just take their own? We're kicking around the idea of possibly giving every instructor their own lavalier microphone. Well, that comes with EQ, pairing, any other instance that now if someone has to go and support that, now we're at that 6-foot privacy bubble and everybody's wearing masks and you got to wear your gloves and you got to go in there at work. And it's very an uncomfortable situation to think about every piece of equipment that now needs to become personalized. There's no more group community property. I mean, take all the computers out of the classroom, give everybody a laptop. Where do you draw the line, right? So I think this year is going to be a lot of that, troubleshooting to find out right now, how are we going to build our future standard? We have our standard right now. Standards evolve all the time. But I think this semester, we have our campus, we have a month of summer starting in the middle of July. They go till August, and then fall starts in August. I think we're going to use that, 8 weeks of classes, 10 weeks of classes to develop for next spring, because I don't think we have the answer right now. I don't think anyone has the answer as much as everybody thinks they do.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that one thing that we might want to recognize is there's probably a difference between future ready and COVID ready, right? COVID is a temporary setback in our learning experience for our institutions, right? But that's not necessarily future ready. Now, there will be some things, like if you look at the whole work from home phenomenon that's happened, will some of that translate into the business world long term? Yes. Will some of those hybrid spaces and online teaching translate into our traditional, R1 institutions in the long run? Yes. But how much, I think, is still to be decided. And maybe combining and being, if we're being too strict with thinking that future ready means COVID ready, that we're going to run into problems there, right? Especially when you talk about things like the cleaning. And Bob, you were saying yes. So what are your thoughts on that?
A bunch of different thoughts. With regard to the lavaliers, you're absolutely right. If you've got a frequency plan at school, you can't just hand everyone a belt pack and say, go forth and prosper. That's not going to work. But by the same token, we're talking about putting something that is air and droplet permeable into their immediate proximity, and that's kind of not okay as well. So what we're thinking at this point is we're not going to buy belt packs for everyone. The belt packs stay in the room, they stay in their chargers, and you come in with your $30 microphone and plug it into the little jack on top of the belt pack, and when you're done, you unplug it and you take your nasty soiled microphone away with you. And you can just kind of keep using your own device. With regard to having touch issues in the classroom, I mean, I don't think anyone's got any huge enthusiasm about going in and cleaning touch screens at this point, because they're not really meant to be cleaned in any kind of mass way, right? If you look at, for example, I'm not going to mention any of the brands, but if you look at the brands that say, how do you touch our touch screens? It's spraying onto a microfiber cloth and gently wiping, and Q-tips in the corners, and for God's sake, don't touch the bezel, and that's not a win. Voice is not the only other answer. I mean, the thing that's changed is we got these things now, right? And this, I think, is going to be an interesting play, because with your own personal smartphone, then there's the potential that you could take control of the room. Certainly at the first level, where you've got the ungodly expensive application that runs on your phone that ties into the room system. Or maybe, because most of us operate our own networks, maybe we can get a little smarter about that. So that's something we're going to be poking at pretty hard.
Oh, that's fantastic. So let me go now to Jeff, because now you're a technical college. That's like by definition hands-on. So how do you handling, just the entire COVID? And then I'm going to throw the same thing to you, make this a two-parter. We're interested in the short term, but is there a difference in the long term? Are you changing anything substantially to account for that?
Well, I'd like to believe that we're trying to be flexible, and we always have. So we're putting systems in that give us simpler and better functionality as we go. We used to have super complicated rooms and, just 80 buttons to, I can't imagine wiping down the old systems. There were 80 buttons there. But so we went to Synapse recently within the last couple of years. That has really changed the way we're doing things. We're encouraging people to use their devices to, present from and not use that instructor station as much. So, we are hands-on. So like our programs like nursing that do simulation, they're well within that 6 feet bubble, wearing masks and everything, but they're training for the nursing profession as well. So they'll have to get used to that as they go out in the world. We're just doing smaller class sizes for those simulation events. Same with law enforcement training that we do, first responders. So it's real world to them. We definitely have their interest and their compliance in terms of working within the guidelines for PPE and that sort of thing. So it's kind of what we do. We're just looking at increasing our online presence a little bit more to synchronous as well as traditional online in the fall, up to 50 or 60% of our overall offerings being offered in those modalities. And so, we just, I kind of feel like I got lucky in putting Zoom in place about a month before this happened. So we just had folks trained up in time, and I'm like just thankful every day that we were able to do that in time. But between that and our Synapse, those were tools we were buying anyway. So again, I don't think we did anything super special for COVID. I like Bob's idea of giving everybody a mic. If the Wolf Vision people turn off their audio for a second, we use dock cameras, but they're not the Wolf Vision brand, but they're relatively inexpensive.
Thank you for joining us. We will.
Yeah, I'll be back. No, I won't be back. But no, we have some visualizers in some areas, but in the rest of our college, we have some very inexpensive dock cameras that are HD quality, et cetera, et cetera. So it just plays into their teaching styles, because some of them just want to point it at their notebook and write on it, and so others want to use digital whiteboarding. That's great. I'm using one as a web camera right now. So that's an option if people want to do lecture capture or present from home. So those are inexpensive enough that it's feasible for us to look at issuing one of those to all faculty members instead of tricking out a number of rooms. So I guess that's one of the few things that we've done that we're thinking about.
Yep. No, that's great. And I think that the key is being able to trust the technologies that we've already knew about. Frank nailed it when he said earlier that our "I told you so" moment is now, right? We have a spotlight. We have a seat at the table. I mean, the meetings that I'm in and the circles that I'm now invited into, I would have never been brought into prior to COVID, right? Or at least it would have been a few different levels of emails, and then the message would have been brought up. But now I'm sitting at the table directly with those decision makers at the highest level. So now that means it is our time to shine. So I want to turn this now, because it's easy to talk about the technology, and we love to play with toys. That's why we do what we do. But let's look at it from the student point of view. We have a little note here in our pre-conversations about define different versions of remote participant, individual dorm, group, separate, all that stuff. But I want to dig into that a little bit more. In my previous panel, I talked about, and kind of my 30 seconds of advice was, remember the purpose, why we do this. Why are we in higher ed and not any other vertical, right? What makes us special? And that's the student learning, the teaching and learning, being able to invest in the next generation. How do you take into account the student experience as a technologist at the university? Let me go to you, Jason, on that, because I saw a quick nod from you.
Well, I think, it's kind of what I had said before. We're trying to build out our synchronous learning spaces so that we can help facilitate full participation from the remote folks. So we're envisioning a situation where your inability to be co-located in the classroom isn't going to be a detriment to your participation, right? So we're trying to build a system that allows for that, so that you can kind of, I think one of the pieces of guidance that we were given is that we want folks to feel like they're kind of embedded in the space. So it's about, how we're placing the cameras, what kind of cameras that we're using. The audio system is really where a pretty large majority of the budget in these designs are kind of dedicated to, so that we can do that, so that we can have a situation where if you're a remote participant, you'll be able to be wherever you need to be, right? If you can't be in the classroom for whatever reason, you can get as good of a experience as we can provide, with, whatever restrictions that we have, budgetary, et cetera. And that's kind of what is the inspiration for our design. So I'm trying my level best, and our team is trying our level best to try to facilitate that with the technology that we can. So I think it's that full duplex communication, the ability for you to feel like you're in the space as much as you possibly can, all things considered.
Love that. Love that. I'm going to go around the whole horn on this question because I think this is important. So Bob, your thoughts on that?
I think Jason's exactly right. It's about inclusion. It's about having people be able to be part of what it is that's going on in the classroom, whatever the circumstances may be. Right now, it happens to be a shelter-at-home circumstance that is keeping us from gathering in classrooms together. But a year ago, and 2 years ago, and 10 years ago, it was our athletes going off for a game in the middle of the quarter, and just radio silence for that period of time in their participation in the class. It's students going to research conferences. It's students going out for field research. Providing the facility that allows us to keep those people included over time and provide them with an experience that is, as Jason says, as much like being there as you can arrange, as much as equitable as that experience can be. For the folks who are there in the live audience. That's hugely important, and it's something that we're using this, again, I'm with Frank also. I think in 6 months we're going to be in a different place, but I'm also looking at it as I'm in kind of a deficit situation for a lot of years back for not being able to deal with students needing to participate remotely. And so we're using this as an opportunity to get at that problem over the long term.
I love that. Even just being able to now think that we can reach out and engage in this way and have that seat at the table. That's fantastic. So Frank, to you next, and I'm going to add an extra caveat onto that. Does that also mean that we have to pay attention to production value at the same time?
Yeah. I think in the grand scheme of things, I think it was in Andy's group earlier than us, they're saying that audio is better than video. You need to hear it. A talking head's a talking head. You don't need to see the instructor. You need to hear that instructor. Instructor's got his content.
Sometimes you don't want to see the faculty member. No,
well, yeah.
Hold on. There we go.
always at the ready you are. I think it's production value is going to be key, but I think the production of audio and content is what we need. We need the content more than anything. The video portion of it's going to be great. In the spaces that you can afford to do full video production, but it's got to be easy enough to use that anybody can walk in and use it. I'm thinking in my head here as this is going on, as I have a campus with 190 plus general purpose classrooms that come September, a lot are going to be empty. So on a campus that went forever of not having enough classroom spaces, that we needed to put classes back to back all over the place for these campus spaces. Well, since we're not going to be doing that, and a lot of the classes that have 100 and some students in it are going to go strictly online, well, now I got a lot of room that I can give me some money and I could chop that up and make you 4 production rooms. So now you got 4 production spaces for your faculty to come in and do that. Will that happen? Don't know. Do I have the crystal ball that you see through, Joe? No, I don't. But can I possibly lobby for that? Can I ask my higher ups? Look at, find 3 classrooms in this building that you don't need anymore, that you're absolutely never going to put classes in. Let's take that equipment out and let's chop it up and make 4 little production spaces, or whatever you want to call it. The faculty can come in with their ID cards, walk into a room, record their lecture, walk out, and that, I think that is one way that it can get us to the next level. I think it's going to help our current problem that we're in, but I think even moving forward, I think it'd be a good thing to fulfill and sustain our online presence.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of, I let the cat out of the bag with that, and my boss is probably watching, so he knows what I'm going to come back at him with now. But I'll make it sound like I thought about it for weeks, but it really just popped in my head.
And this is the opportunity. Strike while the iron's hot, you know? Vegas is open, get the classrooms going. All right, Jeff, your thoughts there.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of ride on Frank's coattail there, because we have done exactly that with, we operate a regional consortium of a partnership with our high schools to let them deliver coursework to each other over a distance learning network. And then they take gateway classes, our college classes as well. And so we've been doing that forever. And that technology has kept evolving, obviously, and you know, as it goes on. But, you know, we got to the point where we were doing some of that within the college as well for low enrollment classes. We're a regional, you know, we cover 3 counties in our state. And so we got 80 miles between a couple of our campuses. And so if we have low enrollments, we want them to use technology to allow that class to still run. And so we've been having these conversations for a long time. So we actually moved to send-only sites. So we took a small conference room that was never used for anything else, and we turned it into a little production space for sending only. So the intention was that the instructor would be in there and then would teach to our remote campuses. And, you know, students on that end might go to a small conference room too, because there might only be 2 or 3 of them at any given site. So we're using some non-traditional spaces to have a whole class with 8, 10, 12 people in it that wouldn't have run otherwise. So we've had that model in place for a while. Not much interest in it prior to COVID, I would say.
You're pretty popular now, though, aren't you?
Yeah. So there's a lot of opportunities there for sure.
Yeah, it's funny because we're doing very similar. We have the group study rooms down in our main library that we control, and we just went and put a bunch of the D10 displays in there, the touch-enabled, Zoom-enabled display, and that's our lecture hall, right? And I've said this other places is, you know, the larger the class, you get to the 500 and 600 person class, the more likely it is that it's a talking head and it's not an interactive class. So to bring that online, I just need someone to be able to sit there and speak to a camera and hopefully be able to do bring the TAs and GAs in to help facilitate other conversations or discussion groups. But for the main lecture, I don't need that large space anymore. I can use a group study room that has a proper camera and ability to share their content. And now what that does, that saves that auditorium, which after, you know, would have been, say, 300 people or so, is now only 70 with social distancing. But now I can put a 70-person classroom, a class in there that would have normally been 70, that would have been in another room, and you know, have that enrollment cut directly in there. So you're playing a game of shuffleboard with it, but you can make it work if you start thinking about these things outside of the box, right? Yep. So I know with our time, I want to do one more topic here. Hopefully we can get through it. I won't mind if we run past the 45. So we're just going to roll. Because
he was not adamant about that at all.
No.
So take all the time you need.
So we've talked about a lot of different things. We talked about physical space. We talked about the student experience. Now let's talk about the faculty experience, right? If we're going to future ready these and we're adding layers of hybrid use and we're adding cameras in and we're making this, how do we keep it simple user experience for the faculty members to be able to handle this? Are we having to be super high touch to help them out? What kind of hypercare programs are we looking at? Just, you know, all of those aspects. Are we changing our GUIs? Whatever. I'm just throwing all this out there. I'm going to start with Bob on this one. Talk about the faculty experience now. How are we handling that?
You know, I've had the experience a number of times of faculty deciding that they really wanted to record their class and they wanted to present. And I think in a couple of really memorable occasions, the faculty thought that what Johnny Carson used to do was easy. And they would just kind of roll in and be on camera and it'd be great. They'd be charming and disarming and everyone would be thrilled to be in their presence. And then they saw the video that came out of that. And they realized that there's a reason that Johnny Carson has 30 people behind the camera that you never see that make him look that good and make it look that easy. And so jump to another situation. And instructional technology, one of the lists out of EDUCAUSE has been having a conversation recently, people saying, hey, do you have a video kit that people can check out and take somewhere and shoot video? Because of course, all of our faculty have camera skills and framing skills and lighting skills and right. So the solution that group seems to have come to is, this is the golden age of the one-touch studio, out of PSU, where you can walk into a room, you stick a thumb drive into a slot, you hit a big red button, there's a countdown, the lights come on, and you're on. But it's a very limited space. You don't have to figure out where the camera goes. You don't have to figure out the lighting. You don't have to do anything. And when you're done, you hit stop. It spits it out onto your thumb drive. You pull it out and you walk away. I think the only addition that we'd really want to make to that is to add 2 streams of video, one for whatever it is the media is that they're bringing to the party, and then the other for the talking head side of things. But if we can get to that quickly, I think that's the sort of thing that we'll be putting into the small classrooms, so the faculty can have a little bit more of a happy Tonight Show experience.
That's great. I think that's so important, because they're going to be able to now, and also gives added use of those spaces, right? It doesn't have to be a class. They can be, hey, right, after hours, come in, record that lecture for the things that are going to be asynchronous. And so you're getting a dual use out of that. Jason, let's go to you now, because you're in the studios too there. Mm-hmm. So you guys think production, you think, but maybe maybe you're super hands-on, but how are you looking at the faculty side and them being able to handle this?
So I think it isn't, we're really not approaching it with this or that type of scenario. I think we're really trying to focus on a kind of menu of options. So we have a lot of different spaces kind of built out for this. So we have a global classroom, which is a kind of like high touch Zoom studio with integrated support. We have ability for doing kind of one touch recordings. We have even more complex design or more complex setups for folks to come into studios to do recording. And I think that we're also looking at a lot of different solutions kind of in between. For me, one of the things I always kind of look at these solutions is, what are we asking the faculty to do, right? So if you write out a pre-flight checklist that's more than a few steps, or that we're not, that's going to be an issue, right? Because the faculty member has to deal with all of their technology issues, but then they also have to actually, give the goods, as it were, with instruction. So we have to do whatever we can to kind of reduce that. I mean, the system should be designed to reduce that workload for them, so they can focus on the thing that they're the subject matter expert at, focus on the thing that they need to deliver, through that recording or whatnot. So I think, for us, we're trying to kind of agree on a common, platform, common sets of tools, and then build and scale up and down from that. But I think really with a focus on trying to reduce friction and reduce that kind of need for people to really, understand all the bits and bobs that are going on behind the scenes.
No, love that. I love thinking about it as reducing friction, because that's one of the things that we preach here, is a frictionless experience for whether we talk about it in our support model, but we really just thinking about that. And, when a faculty member comes in, I hate to be a faculty member who's going to show up on campus and have all this new technology and all this new way of having to hybrid teach. And now how can we keep that with as less friction as possible? That's fantastic. Jeffrey, to you now. Talk about the faculty experience on your side, how that changes, how you've had to adapt to it. How are you keeping that side again? Because again, you guys might be a little bit more hands-on already. Are there adaptations?
So like everyone, probably we've got tons of new how-tos out there on using Zoom and using different things that, folks had never bothered to pay much attention to before. We have a great instructional technologist who's been very hands-on, helping faculty kind of embrace these new tools. I would say that, I hate to be the silver lining guy again, but the fact that they have to use Zoom for their ongoing meetings and for their instruction, they're starting to get it. I mean, they're not going to ever have those camera skills that Bob alluded to in terms of framing and all that, but I'm encouraged when I go to a Zoom meeting and it doesn't look like everyone's in witness protection. They are learning to put some light in front of them so that they aren't just totally backlit all the time. So in a way, again, this is sort of getting them at least thinking along the lines. So when they do come into an area that's set up to do lecture capture, they can go, oh, where's the light going to be? Okay, how's the framing? Can I do this and still be seen? Those are questions they may never have thought of before this.
So, you're talking about lighting. I took out 2 of the fluorescents above me so it didn't shine my head. And now it makes me look dead with my eyes. So, either way, I'm going to either blind the camera. With,
so you got to get one of those ring lights, right? Like you got to be like your Instagram influencers.
There you go.
Oh, because that's my resume line item, obviously. All right, Frank, take us home. Faculty experience. How are we helping there, reducing that friction for them?
Yeah, the cool part about where I'm at right now is just as COVID was kicking in and throwing everybody off campus, we were in the process of finishing a faculty center. It's basically a teacher's lounge with 6 breakout areas of little collaboration spaces and a lectern with a camera for recording so they can record lectures. We can have Andy from our staff give trainings in there, record them for them to watch in future. So I think when the faculty come back and start using that space, I'm going to basically be over there quite a bit with Andy and trying to, pick their brains, because for the last 8-10 weeks, we didn't talk to faculty. They were gone. We're basically like shooting in the dark here, trying to figure out how they're going to come back to campus. It's not exactly the right way to do it, but I think we're going to get them up and running, and we're going to, muddle through as best we can. I'm going to use that faculty space as a research lab and try and pick out some more things that the faculty need or don't need in their classrooms. And yeah, you're bringing 20 people into the kitchen, and everybody's going to put a little in there, and you have to just take out the pieces that work best for us. I can't give an answer of where we're going. Just know that we need to include the faculty with making those decisions. That hasn't always been the way to do things. Sometimes we just did it because as the technology guys, we knew that was the best way for us to support it. And they'll just come in and they'll deal with it. But now we need to include them, like they need to include us at the table. We need to have them at the table as well, or at least a representative of them to help us figure out how we're going to get this going moving forward.
Absolutely agree. I think that you kind of, to summarize that up, and is what the 4 of you said, is there's huge opportunity here, right? I mean, even if we take all of our conversation we've had up till now, opportunities with new technologies and improving our spaces, both virtually and on-prem, opportunities with our students to really focus on, how teaching and learning impacts them, and opportunities with our faculty. This is, as Frank said earlier, we're here. We can shine at this moment. We can take and stake our claim, and people are watching. And I think that if we don't come out of COVID as university technologists with a new level of respect for what we do, then then we've failed, because we've really had a very, very important impact on the future of not just our schools, but I think higher ed in general. So I want to say kudos to all of you. I saw that Paul's mic is unmuted, so I am going to let it turn back over to him. And we just thank you all. This was fantastic. This was just, I love this.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, guys. It's hard to imagine how valuable this kind of stuff would be if I were someone in your shoes at a different institution going through this whole thought process. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.